Okay.
This is Josh here from InsideWrestlingTruth, and I have a very special guest today. He's the greatest manager of all time. He is a hometown hero to me and one of the smartest minds in the business, period, Mr. Jim Cornette. Jim?
Josh, thank you. You actually read that exactly the way I wrote it. I appreciate it.
The first question is, talk about your first memories of wrestling.
Oh my God, the first memory I have of wrestling actually was not Louisville wrestling, it was Indianapolis wrestling, Dick the Bruiser's promotion, because my mom, when I was like 9 years old, it was up late one Saturday night with a cold, and she couldn't sleep, so she was switching around the TV, and back in those days, the TV stations went off the air before cable and everything at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and Channel 3 here in Louisville went off the air, and so she turned to start finding, still no remote, she had to turn the channel. And as she turned by Channel 4, there was a picture on it, and it was from Bloomington, Indiana, outside Indianapolis, and of course it would come through when Channel 3 was off the air. And it was wrestling, Dick the Bruiser's TV show, and the next day she happened to mention to me, Jimmy, I saw wrestling last night on TV that looked just like it looked when I moved to Louisville in 1951, when she was 18 years old. And son of a gun, it was probably still Dick the Bruiser back then. He used all the same talent, Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder, but I saw Bobby Heenan and the Blackjacks and Handsome Jimmy Valiant and all those guys. And so I found wrestling on TV here in Louisville. Jerry Jarrett had just opened up Louisville, which had no pro wrestling for years, in the late 60s, and in 1970 he opened it up. And so I started watching Louisville wrestling, saw Jackie Fargo, Tojo Yamamoto, Jerry Jarrett, Kurt and Carl Von Bronner, Don and Al Green, and I was hooked. And from then on, I was hooked.
Now, how did your the tennis racket, how did that come about?
Oh, that was a lot later. Yeah. I was a lot older when I was 9. Actually, after I'd become a photographer and kind of fill-in ring announcer and wrote the programs and ran errands and was all around stooge boy, at the matches down at the Louisville Gardens on Tuesday nights, they finally said, well, you've been hanging around for so long, you want to be a manager. And of course, immediately I said yes. And I worked here for the first 16 months or so that I was involved in wrestling, and I didn't have any gimmick or carry anything, it was just me, and I was getting experience. But then when I got the chance to go to Mid-South Wrestling and with the Midnight Express and work for Bill Watts, the wrestlers were all ribbing me, saying, oh, you know those Cajuns down there, because the fans were wild down there. They were wild here, but they were violent in the Mid-South Wrestling, especially in Louisiana and Oklahoma, Mississippi. They're going to knife you, they're going to cut you, they're going to beat you to death, right? They're all getting on me, so I'm scared to death, but I'm still going. And Thanksgiving of '83, I happened to be off for a couple of days, and I went with my girlfriend at the time to the movies and saw one of those teen movies, and the rich kid in the group was carrying a badminton racket around, and I wanted to slap him, right? He had a badminton racket through the whole movie, and I said, well, wait a minute. Managers have carried canes and umbrellas and briefcases and everything, but nobody's ever had a tennis racket, and I'm supposed to be the rich kid, right? So instead of a badminton racket, I got the tennis racket because it was bigger, and also it gave me 2 feet of reach on those fans, which it came in quite handy, and it caused me to be arrested a dozen times and have about 15 lawsuits, but by cracky, I had the reach on it. We had riots down there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. One time we had a riot so bad our match caused they started jumping in the ring. The city police department nightsticked so many of the fans trying to get us out of the arena that the internal affairs department came down and investigated the police for doing so much damage, and then finally the Tulsa City Police was barred because of the Midnight Express from working security wrestling matches. They got the county sheriff's department to take over, and the first night they got the sheriff's department to take over, the match before ours, Nikolai Volkov, the Russian, was being taken to the ring by the old county sheriffs, and they go to the ring and all of a sudden you hear a commotion and come back later when there's 2 sheriffs carrying another one and his feet are dragging like that. One of the fans had tried to hit Nikolai Volkov over the head with a metal folding chair and missed, and horse-collared the cop with it and knocked him colder than a banker's heart. And so they're dragging the police, right? That's how wild Tulsa was. They're dragging the police unconscious back to the locker room, and I've got to go out next, and they hate me. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to die.
Let's talk Louisville Gardens.
You got it.
What was your favorite match or memory in Louisville Gardens?
God, there were so many. Some of the memories are not even of matches. That we've been talking here this weekend about some of the old-time fans. There was a time where a woman actually went into labor during a match with Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee, and would not let the EMTs take her to the hospital until she found out who won. And there was a guy that actually jumped in the ring to attack Jerry Lawler one night and found out when Lawler kicked him in the face, the cops drug him out and found out he was on parole for murder.
Wow.
And there was another time where the woman that sat in the front row that actually got my mom and I tickets when I was just a little kid before we met Christine Jarrett, she brought her nephew for the first time ever, and he got so wrapped up in the matches. I'm standing there taking pictures, somebody kicks me in the side, it was him rolling in the ring, and he got beat up. She never let him come back, but I mean, there were great matches. Jerry Lawler and Terry Funk had a match one night at the Guards. Everybody was bleeding, everybody on the card was trying to pull them apart. And the athletic commissioner, state athletic commissioner, Fred Lamson, came up and grabbed the microphone and said, "Okay, boys, the match is over, break it up." And Lawler said, "If you think it's over, get your ass in here, you break it up," right? It was wild, it was crazy. You never knew what was going to happen.
What did you enjoy the most about managing the Midnight Express?
You know, well, obviously they were the greatest team in wrestling. I enjoyed the fact that I could go out on TV and say, we're the greatest tag team in wrestling, and they could back it up. And I could go out and say, we're going to steal the show, and they could back it up. And also they were, you know, three of my best friends. First Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, and then Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane. We traveled together, spent more time with each other in the car and in the planes than we did with each other's families for 7 years. So just the idea that, you know, obviously we attained a pretty good level of success and we made a lot of money, but the most important thing to all of us really was that we could go out, and if we didn't have the best match on the card, it was Ric Flair. That was the challenge. If we didn't have the best match, it was Flair. If Flair didn't have the best match, it was us. We tried to go out every night and do the best we could, tear the house down and give the people what they came for, and that's why they still remember.
They're definitely one of the most underrated tag teams ever, if not the most.
I think anybody that doesn't rate them number one, they're underrated. I'll say that right now.
Okay, in the past, I did interviews with Ricky Morton and Tracy Smothers, and they both have had really great things to say about you. What are your thoughts on those two guys?
Oh my God. Well, Ricky Morton, you know, Ricky Morton has become a catchphrase in wrestling. He's selling like Ricky Morton. Because is it like you got the moves like Jagger, he's selling like Ricky Morton. Ricky was without a doubt the greatest pure babyface in the history of wrestling. And he caused riots. When he would sweat, and when he would get that painful look on his face, and he would reach out to the front row fans and he'd mouth the words, "Help me," and the sweat, it looked like he was crying in pain, and people would come over the rail. And I was on the floor, so I didn't have to be looking, you know, I had my head on a swivel, but Ricky, you know, he was the quintessential babyface, good guy. And Tracy, if it hadn't been for Tracy, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, he was the guy that I've been looking for. Because originally I wanted my top hero in Smoky Mountain to be Brad Armstrong, and Brad unfortunately wasn't available. So I tried Brian Lee, and Brian was a much better heel than he was a babyface. And finally Tracy became available, and he and the Dirty White Boy pretty much carried the single side of Smoky Mountain Wrestling for the rest of the time we were in existence. And Tracy and the chain matches and the Texas death matches and things that he and the White Boy had, and they tore the house down every night. And if it wasn't for Tracy, we would have been very much worse off. Thankfully, the loud people appear to have left.
Yeah. Let's talk about the rise and fall of Smoky Mountain Wrestling a little bit.
Okay.
What do you think made it work, and what was kind of like the ending of it?
Well, you know, what made it work as well as it did, it's still fondly remembered, critically acclaimed, as they say. We had a great product. We had a great show. We had a great TV show with great wrestling matches and great talent. And that's the good part about it. And it was in an area of the country where people genuinely liked wrestling and still wanted to go and see their own local wrestling and not the cookie cutter stuff from the national promotions. What the drawback was is the early 90s, things were changing. They were changing in the television industry, and that's when the deregulation happened. Every time the government deregulates something, banks, television, bad things happen. Vote Democratic, folks. But the paid programming came in. and the TV stations just a few years earlier that were giving hours to wrestling programs in exchange for commercial time because they got great ratings, now didn't have to employ so many people on their sales forces. They could just say, oh, here, I'll take Richard Simmons' deal a meal for half an hour, and they give me a check for $1,000, and boom, done. So we couldn't get the television coverage in the area we wanted. We wanted to open up Charleston, West Virginia. We wanted to open up Lexington, Kentucky. We wanted to open up Greenville, Spartanburg, Asheville, North Carolina. We couldn't get television in those markets, so our ratings, we won our time slots in Knoxville on the Fox affiliate, and Bristol, Johnson City, Kingsport, the Tri-Cities on the NBC affiliate, did great ratings. As a matter of fact, better ratings now than any wrestling programs on cable or, we did an 8 one time in Knoxville. Who does 8s anymore for wrestling? But we got too big to be small, but we were still too small to be big. We couldn't get the extra television exposure without paying for it. And as a result, we just couldn't run enough major events to keep a good crew employed regularly. And it was just, it was a catch-22. And we finally closed down Thanksgiving of 1995. That was the year that even the WWF lost $6 million. It remains the only year that Vince McMahon has lost money except by another outside endeavor. He's never lost money on wrestling. He lost money on bodybuilding, he lost money on movies, he lost money on restaurants, he lost money on football. Now he's going to lose a fortune on a network, but he's never lost money on wrestling except in 1995. That's the year we closed up. So I figured, hey, if Vince couldn't make it that year, then why should we? And I take pride, Mr. Heyman and myself, my Bizarro World alter ego, Paulie and myself, I figured out one time he started a promotion, he ended up folding up. I started a promotion, I ended up folding up. But I figured out one time that if we had done everything exactly the same in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but we never charged anybody a penny for a ticket, we still wouldn't have lost as much money as Paulie did with ECW. Right. So it's the small things. It's the small things.
What was your first impression?
Hello. Would you like to say hello to the television audience? No, come on out. No, come on, please. Be part of Inside Wrestling. Come on. Come on, you can come through. We'll edit.
Yeah, we can edit.
I'm sorry. Jim Cornette, how are you? How you doing?
Why did you come? I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. We're just co-opting the space.
I like you better than that.
What were your,
You got to show that. You got to show that.
What were your first impressions on Vince McMahon?
The first time we met him was 1986. He flew the Midnight Express and I up to Connecticut because we were the World Tag Team Champions for Crockett, and he wanted to steal us. And we agreed to go listen, and the first impression we had was the guy, he looked like he was driving a car that John Steed would have driven in the Avengers. It was this old antique car, and he had the suit on, and he got a hotel room so we could meet in private because it was a secret meeting. It didn't stay secret very long in the wrestling industry. But, we weren't speaking the same language because he was talking about, you guys will make more money you've ever made before in your lives. Well, we're going to make dolls of all the wrestlers. We're like, what? We're heels. Why would anybody want to buy dolls of us? We want people to kill us and try to go to jail to get their hands on us. And anyway, he didn't say anything about who we were going to wrestle or whether we'd have a run with the belts or how he was going to push us or who our opponents were going to be, all the things that normal promoters would talk about. It just didn't connect with us. So we ended up staying where we were, and that was actually the best decision because we were living in Charlotte, North Carolina, working for the NWA. We were World Tag Team Champions, continued to be featured, making a couple $100,000 a year apiece in 1986. We wouldn't have been featured nearly as well in the land of the Giants. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to go out and have 30-minute matches at house shows every night, tear the house down. It'd been the 8 minutes and out, deal. And I wouldn't have had the chance to go on and dominate the television programs with my interviews. So we made the right choice to stay in the right place. And he did quite well without us. And then finally, when I went to work there in '93, there's parts of Vince you love personally. He's a fun guy sometimes to be around. He never stops working and will never let you stop working either. In the car, on the plane, at night, during the day, whatever. But he's a fun guy to be around sometimes, but he has his own picadillos. I like to say about Vince, if you work for him, you will love him, you will hate him, and sooner or later you'll develop a twitch.
What was it like managing Vader, Owen, and Bulldog?
I love Owen was great. Owen's one of the rare Canadians that actually has a fun sense of humor. Most Canadians are they're on the dry side, but Owen was fun. He was always ribbing people. Davey was his partner in crime. And I won't go into the whole story now, but if you take a look at the Corny in the UK DVD, available at JimCornette.com, I tell the story of how Owen and Davey both ribbed me one time with a phone call from Stu Hart, except it wasn't a rib. I won't give away the punchline here, but Vader was not a barrel of laughs. Vader was more on the serious side. Leon, a great guy, great athlete, played pro football, was a big bruising guy, and should have gotten a better run than he did. But Shawn Michaels, was just a big pussy, and just always whined and complained. And one time Leon rolled out on Tulsa, as a matter of fact. He rolls out of the ring and he's all upset. That's what he told me if I pulled his hair like that again, it'd be my job. Shawn didn't want to work with when they bought Vader, they should have known what they got. Vader got over by being a big, mean son of a gun that just smashed the piss out of you. And he was a big star, and they tried to turn him into a teddy bear, and it didn't work. Shawn vetoed his title run and everything else because he didn't want to get in the ring with him because he didn't have the guts to take it. And he was making a lot of money to take stuff like that. But Shawn Michaels was a prick to everybody. I mean, if he had as many sticking out of him as he's been to people, he'd look like a porcupine. He was a giant prick.
Who were some of the biggest crybabies backstage in the WWF?
Well, we did. Actually, Shawn, nobody could be a bigger crybaby than Shawn Michaels. Because even Nash and Hall and the rest of his clique, they were all pricks too, but they weren't crybabies. Shawn was a crybaby prick. They were just pricks.
Who are your top 5 most overrated wrestlers in your WWF run?
Overrated in WWF history? I mean...
While you were there?
Well, he was there for a few months while I was there, and I hate to speak ill of the dead, but let's face the Ultimate Warrior. My God, Jesus Christ. Vince continues to this day and always has had a fascination with bodybuilders, and that's why Helmsley ended up his son-in-law, because I didn't think that Vince would ever be stupid enough to let his daughter marry a wrestler, but son of a gun, here comes Triple H, and let's work out, Vince, and that's the way he bonded with Luger. It's the way he bonded with Warrior. It's the way he bonded with Hogan, Triple H. He's not gay, but he loves men bodybuilders, right? And so the Ultimate Warrior was the most overrated wrestler of all time, and history has borne this out, that he was the second biggest attraction in the wrestling industry for about a 2 or 3 year period, because Vince smashed him over and was great at making a star. But then when he went away, because he started believing his own publicity, and everybody who had carried him and gotten him over to that point, he just shit on him. Bobby Heenan, he actually broke Bobby Heenan's neck and never even apologized. He clotheslined him from behind when Bobby wasn't ready for it, knocked him off the ring, and he never even apologized. So if Bobby Heenan don't like you, I don't like you either, just to let you know. And then when he came back for the nostalgia runs, it was a week or two. Oh yeah, he's back. Oh jeez, he's a shit. And it didn't work. And then, but thankfully he got the closure before. And then on the female side, Sable, the female Ultimate Warrior. She couldn't do a promo, she couldn't wrestle, she couldn't dance, she couldn't sing, she didn't want to learn any of these things, looked great standing there in a t-shirt, and she picked a great plastic surgeon, so she had that talent. But because Vince McMahon and Vince Russo, you ought to have heard them sitting around the table. Can you imagine Sable in the white cotton pants? I like black leather and fishnets myself. I don't want white cotton panties. I'm not after little Rebecca of Donnybrook Farm, but Vince Russo had a crush on Sable. And Vince McMahon loved her, and they pushed her over Sunny, who was much more talented, but was a cunt. But I loved Sunny because she was a talented cunt. And you could tell, Sunny, you're a bitch. Yes, she took pride in that, but that was what her deal was. But anyway, so Warrior and Sable, you could stop there because that's enough overrating for one telecast.
Are there any guys that worked at OVW that you thought should have got a break that didn't?
How much time you got? Johnny Jeter should have been the next generation Chris Jericho. He moved from San Diego, California to Louisville, Kentucky with everything he owned in the trunk of his used car and got a job waiting tables at Chili's to pay for his wrestling school tuition. And he got so good so quick, I put the belt on him 18 months after his first wrestling lesson. And brought Chris Jericho in to work with him, named him the Thrill Seeker, because I'd given Jericho and Storm, I gave them their first jobs in the United States, named them the Thrill Seekers. So I gave it to Jeter, brought Jericho in to work with Jeter. He went back and said, oh, this kid's great. It was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of Gimmicks. 5 guys. 4 of them were tremendously talented, and one, Nick Mitchell, he wasn't going to make it. And they lined them all up against the wall and shot him with a bad gimmick altogether. Johnny Jeter was one. Mike Mondo was in there. He had tremendous talent. He still, to this day, is a great trainer. Does the motion capture stuff for video games because he can do everybody's moves. Then, of course, Nick Nemeth, who became Dolph Ziggler, finally he's the only one that nipped up out of the Spirit Squad, and he today is one of the finest talents in the business. And Ken Doan, who pissed off the wrong people and was quickly dismissed, but he had a lot of talent. Doug Basham, the Damager, became Doug and Danny Basham, and that stinking horrible Linda Miles. Linda Miles Shaniqua was the Basham's manager and buried them in the WWF because I ran a wrestling school where I was putting guys on television when they'd had maybe 6-8 weeks of lessons, and Linda Miles was the only person that ever did a match on OVW television that I could not air, that I had to just roll a VTR over the top of. I've still got a VHS tape of it, the only one that exists on my shelf at home, and it says Linda Miles' shitty match. And finally we ran her off. The list goes on. So many guys that creative has gotten more important than talent in wrestling now in the WWE. And if they was, oh, the writers can't figure out anything to do for you, well, fire the fucking writers. Or they would make this guy who's an outstanding athlete and a tremendous prospect, and they'd give him some stupid gimmick that he was embarrassed to go out there and call himself or do or whatever. And so, you know, a lot of great talent graduated from Ohio Valley Wrestling. John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, Brock Lesnar, Victoria, Charlie Haas, Shelton Benjamin. You know, somewhere around 100 guys have gone to the WWE or TNA from Ohio Valley Wrestling, but they wasted as many as they took up because they were looking for size and whoever the writers could think of something funny to do for, rather than wrestling talent that could prosper on their own and get over with the fans. And you know, now a lot of those guys, Jeter went back to San Diego and he's a personal trainer now. Doesn't even wrestle anymore. He should be one of the top guys in business today.
What led you to leave Ring of Honor?
That was the subject of a 3-hour-long Breaking Kayfabe interview, but I will sum it up by saying two reasons. Number one, I had deluded myself into thinking that Sinclair Broadcasting, a bunch of right-wing Republican assholes, were actually serious about opening up the third wrestling promotion and were going to put some money in it, and found out they were going to run it like a flea market. And secondly, they hired this fucking 26-year-old kid from the accounting department. I thought I was going to be working for Joe Koff, a guy who had a background in wrestling, having worked for the Florida office and was an important executive with Sinclair. And all of a sudden we found out this 26-year-old accountant who had never seen a wrestler in a pair of tights before they bought the company was suddenly telling me and Gary Jester and Delirious, with a combined 80 years experience in wrestling, what talent would draw and what towns we should book and what we should do. And I had to talk the ring crew twice and several of the wrestlers out of knocking him out, and then I had to start talking myself out of knocking him out, and then I determined that I wasn't going to talk myself out of knocking him out anymore. So for his health, my mental health, his physical health, and just overall not wanting to go on with it any further, I ended up where they put me in doing 5 hours of television for 70 broadcast stations across the country in an unheated ice rink in Bell Vernon, Pennsylvania, 5 miles off the Pennsylvania Turnpike, where I spent a 14-hour day trying to do television in front of 300 people with mittens and parkas on in a 1,000-seat building with concrete bleachers and no money for pipe and drape in the budget. And on the last match, I had one of the guys down on the ground with an ambulance pulling up to the back because he'd taken a bad bump and couldn't breathe, and we thought he might have a punctured lung. And I sent people up to the front to get somebody from the office to come back with some money and some authorization to pay for his hospital stay or whatever, and found out they were all gone because it was midnight, and they'd been there since 3 in the afternoon. I got there at 11 that morning, and they were tired. So I told everybody there what I thought of everybody who wasn't there, and I came home, and I have had nothing to do with them ever since.
What's your thoughts on the IWA Mid-South and hardcore wrestling?
I think that they're all a bunch of defective genetic morons that live downstream from a nuclear plant. Ian Rotten nearly ruined wrestling in the state of Kentucky, nearly ruined wrestling in the state of Indiana. He got wrestling in Indiana kicked out of National Guard armories. He's the reason why that the Kentucky Athletic Commission is the most stringent commission in the country today, with rules and regulations up the ass, because he and his band of merry misfits that want to mutilate themselves in fucking roller skate fucking places and goddamn National Guard armories in front of 100 warped, sadistic people who want to see that kind of shit, have given wrestling a bad name. Ian Rotten is responsible for people being crippled, possibly one guy dying, because that was the guy that OD'd, that he paid in pain pills. He's a fucking piece of shit, and everybody that enjoys hardcore wrestling and everybody that participates in hardcore wrestling with your fucking barbed wire, your goddamn broken glass, and your mouse traps, and your thumbtacks, and your AIDS-infected hypodermic needles can kiss my big fat white ass, because you have destroyed an industry that thrived for so long because people like you weren't allowed to be a part of it.
What about sums of it? Who are some of your favorite managers in the business?
Oh my God. Bobby Heenan's the greatest manager of all time. And people always come up, oh, Jim Cornette, and I'm sure they say it to everybody, oh, Jim Cornette, you're the greatest manager. No, I refuse that. Me and J.J. Dillon have agreed that Bobby Heenan's the greatest manager of all time. And I'm sure that probably Oliver Humperdinck would have chimed in had we asked him before he passed away. I don't know what Gary Hart would have said. Jimmy Hart's never going to say anything bad about anybody, and I love Jimmy. Hello, Poo-Poo, if you're watching, Jimmy Mouth of South Hart. But Bobby Heenan was the best of all time. But when I grew up, I got to grow up here watching guys like Sam Bass, Sir Steve Clements, Saul Weingroff, you know, the old-time classic managers, and they were great too, but Bobby's the guy.
What do you think is the biggest problem with the business today?
You ain't got that much time. Everybody, it's become a parody of what it used to be. Nobody takes it seriously anymore, both fans and wrestlers and people who are running the promotion. It's all about entertainment. It's all about a show. Everybody knows what's going on, how things are done. Dutch Mantell said it best. He said, we used to pretend to hurt each other and the people believed it. Now, we really do hurt each other and nobody believes it. So I like the business a lot better when the marks were out front.
Do you think there will ever be wrestling in the Louisville Gardens again?
No. Not only do I not think that, I think if they do save the Gardens, it will be somebody turning it into something else besides an arena, and I don't think that there will be any wrestling promotions other than the WWE who would not go there that could actually put enough of a crowd in the Gardens anymore. In case you haven't noticed, Ring of Honor is still running rec centers, and TNA ain't setting the world on fire with their empty Coliseum matches, and who else is it going to be? So, you know, OVW, in 2000 and 2001, we did 3 shows there that drew a combined total of $160,000 at the gate and sold out once for Christmas Chaos at 6,000, and drew 13,000 people for the 3 shows. And that was the last hurrah. It's not going to be able to be applied. We couldn't do that today. It's not possible.
Do you have any regrets in your career?
Besides the fact I didn't knock out the accountant in Ring of Honor, and besides the fact I didn't run Vince Russo down with my car one time when I had the chance, you can't regret stuff, because if you had a chance, if you did something, it's because you thought it was the right thing to do at the time, or you had no other choice but to do that. So you can't really regret stuff like that. But if I had seen, I've been screaming all along for the past 15 years what was going to happen to wrestling because of what they've done to it, and the things that, you know, when the Attitude Era, great, we're hot-shotting because business was down. You got a hot shot to get business back. But I just had Lance Storm on my podcast, the Jim Cornette Experience on MLW.com. And he brought up the subject, and that's why we debated it for an hour. We really didn't debate it. We both agreed. The Attitude Era did bigger business than had ever been done before, but because people were in charge of the business, such as that fucking moron Vince Russo, if it was raining soup, he'd be out in the yard with a fork. People like that were in charge of wrestling. They didn't understand that when you hot shot, you have to pull back once you get the people, because you will immune them to bumps, you'll immune them to angles, you'll immune them to every tool you have in your toolkit to draw money. They just kept going and going, and Russo was so stupid one time. I said, Vince, what are you going to do when business goes down? He said, oh, well, if we're smart, it'll never go down. Well, there's the key. You ain't smart, motherfucker. And besides that, I hope there's no language restrictions on
There's not, I don't care.
Besides the fact that you're not smart, business always goes down. And sure enough, in 2001, when Russo was already gone, but replaced by the first of the stream of comedy writers that had gotten wrestling, they decided, and even Steve Austin agrees it was a big mistake to this day, but he went along with it. Oh, nobody will ever expect Austin to join Vince. In the space of 3 weeks, 3 things happened in 2001. ECW went under, WCW was bought by the WWE, and Stone Cold Steve Austin hugged Vince McMahon. And business went. And it's never come back. And people didn't realize, and I was sitting there in Houston in the Astrodome, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I saw Austin hug McMahon, and I said, oh God, and here we go. Because Terry Funk used to have a saying, Johnny Valentine did too, I can't make them believe wrestling is real, but I can make them believe that I'm real. And they believed Steve Austin was real. And when he hugged Vince McMahon, then it was, oh, you motherfuckers, you got me. It was just an angle all along. They didn't believe in Austin anymore, because the Steve Austin they believed in would never have done that.
Right.
Now it became a wrestling angle. WCW fans tuned out. We lost 4 million in 2 weeks. ECW fans, they didn't tune out, but they didn't have a TV to watch, so they just went to the indies. And the WWF fans went, Austin, and Rock's gone making movies. And it may never get to that level again, because now what else are you going to do that's any different? They've used it all up. They hot-shotted it till they burnt the motor out, and now everybody knows that. What are you going to do? So I told him this one time. They left him off TNA TV for 6 months because he had everything done to him. He'd been beaten and bloodied in every possible way. He loves that shit. Great athlete, great guy. Doesn't have a wrestling mind because he didn't know when he was not getting himself over, when he was getting himself under. They left him off TV for 6 months to rest him up, to bring him back, because he is a great talent. And I said, now you can start fresh, hopefully. The month after that on pay-per-view, he takes a bump off the stage, through a table, while the table was on fire, setting himself on fire in the process. I said, okay, great. I said, now, how are you going to top that? They're going to stick a fucking hand grenade up your ass. They're going to pull the pin. They're going to draw circles around the ring, and the lucky fan that picks the ring where your spleen lands wins a prize. How are you going to top it?
You're not. So would you say that pro wrestling's dying?
Pro wrestling's already dead. Sports entertainment is not pro wrestling.
Right.
Sports entertainment has a small, loyal fan base. Most of them watch the WWE, which is what Vince was going for. But if you take into account the number of people that were watching pro wrestling on TV in the 70s from all the territories, and now the number that are watching wrestling on TV, it's probably, there's 4 million, 5 million people, let's be charitable. 5 million people watch Raw on Mondays. There were 6 to 7 times as many people watching wrestling in the entire country and all the territories in the 70s. Now, WWE draws decent crowds, not like what they used to, and nobody else draws anything. So there are approximately a 10th or a 20th as many people seeing live wrestling as there were 40 years ago, because there's no shows being run and nobody goes to the shows. And there's never been a time where there were fewer people making a full-time living in the wrestling industry. So there's a sports entertainment business, and this many people support it avidly. But this was the professional wrestling business, and that many people supported it avidly, and that's gone away, and you can't bring it back, because once you parodied something, you can't make people take it seriously again. Imagine if Young Frankenstein came out before Frankenstein. Then would anybody have been scared of Frankenstein? No. They made a joke out of it, so nobody's going to take it seriously anymore.
A lot of wrestlers have passed, over the years. Is there one guy that has passed that has affected you more than any?
Well, everybody that you had a close relationship with affects you. A combination, either Ray Traylor, Big Boss Man, Big Bubba Rogers, or Brian Hildgren, who's Mark Curtis, the referee. Because I'd known Brian at the time he passed away for 20 years, and we've been close friends and stayed in contact all that time. And Bubba, I'd known for almost the same period of time. He had 6 matches before he became Big Bubba Rogers, and became one of the biggest drawing attractions in the NWA because Dusty believed in him and pushed him. He was a great talent, and both of them were way too young. And Brian was like my age, and Bubba was a year and a half younger than me. And of everybody, just because I was close friends with him, we worked together so much, and also the same age and just everything. And just that, I actually just did my Fighting Spirit magazine column that I write for the Fighting Spirit in the UK. It was the anniversary. They both passed away in September. Brian in 1999 and Bubba in 2004. So those would be.
Do you have any last words or anything you'd like to say to Vince?
Well, wait a minute. Now you ask me about people dying and then ask me if I've got any last words. Yeah, please don't jinx me.
Well, yeah.
I've said everything I want to say to Vince Russo, except may he rest in peace. The last words are, I appreciate you asking me to do this interview, and I appreciate you and your lovely wife giving me somebody to talk to here over the weekend at the flea market, and I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thanks, man. It was an honor.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it.